So we have a 5-year-old who never gets tired of candy. They just want more and more and more candy. They always prefer more candy to less. Does this mean that their marginal benefit is increasing with higher quantities of candy? What do you think? Raise your hand if you think that their marginal benefit is increasing for higher quantities of candy. We got 1. Raise your hand if you think it's decreasing for higher quantities of candy. A couple more. So yeah, it is decreasing. Well, at least this does not necessarily tell us that it's increasing, right? So what this is telling us is that they always prefer more candy to less, which means that their marginal benefit is always positive, right? Every additional piece of candy brings you a little bit more benefit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that each additional piece of candy brings you more benefit than the one before, right? Their total benefit is increasing in candy. They'd rather have 10 pounds of candy than 5 pieces of candy, but the 1/1,000,000th piece of candy might not bring them as much joy as that 5th piece of candy. All right, next, this is a tricky one. We know that producers face economies of scale. We talked about this a little bit before. So the marginal cost for Apple to make their 1 millionth iPhone is way less than what your marginal cost would be if you tried to make an iPhone from scratch, right? Much more difficult, much more expensive for you to do that. Does this mean that marginal cost is declining for higher quantities? All right, raise your hand if you think that this means that marginal cost decreases with higher quantities. And raise your hand if you think it does not decrease for higher quantities. All right, so as I mentioned, this is sort of a tricky one. And it's, both answers are true depending on exactly what you mean by the question. So this is literally talking about a situation where the marginal cost of a higher quantity is lower than the marginal cost of a lower quantity, right? So in that sense, it is very much true that the marginal costs are lower for higher quantities. But what this marginal cost thing is talking about is how production changes with different quantities, but the same sort of setup, right? So what I mean by that is if you wanted to start making a factory that could make 1 million iPhones, you would buy a bunch of equipment and machines, and it would take you time to set that up, but you could get your marginal costs down like apples, right? But once given the fixed amount of machinery and productive capacity that you have, then we'd really be looking at if that stays the same, what would change about your marginal costs as quantities went up or down, right? So if Apple can make 10,000 iPhones a day, you said, hey Apple, now I want you to make 20,000 iPhones a day. Then their marginal costs would go because they'd have to scramble. They'd have to change their production process. They'd have to put all their workers on double shift, whatever it is, to increase their quantity. So even for them, marginal costs could be increasing for higher quantities until they were like, oh, now we're doing 20,000 a day. We better open a second factory, and then it would drop back down, right? So all of this is sort of thinking about keeping your equipment, keeping a lot of your production stuff stable, and then once you get a chance to change it, that's when the sort of decreasing returns to scale. All right, next one. You've inherited a giant bread factory for free, sort of Willy Wonka style. But your friend had to buy their bread factory for millions of dollars, right? So you and your friend both have bread factories. The cost to make a single loaf of bread is the same at both factories. Which one of you has higher marginal costs? Raise your hand if you think that you have higher marginal costs than your friend. Raise your hand if you think that your friend has higher marginal costs than you. Raise your hand if you think they're the same. So they're going to be the same in this situation, right? So marginal cost is the cost of making one more unit, right? So the question is, how much does it cost to make one more loaf of bread? Which we said here is going to be the same, right? So the marginal costs are the same. Their total costs are going to be higher because they have to spend millions of dollars on the factory. But once you've got a factory, right, the millions of dollars, that's going to be what we talked about before, is the sunk costs, right? You've already paid it, right? And so it doesn't actually affect the cost of a single loaf of bread being produced. And so the marginal costs are going to be the same, which means, surprisingly, that you and your friend, even though they spent millions of dollars on their factory, should probably make very similar bread producing choices, right? Because you're facing the exact same marginal costs.